Hello everyone, welcome back to another video. Now, if you're a fan of cold and snowy weather, then I actually have some pretty good news for you today, and that is the potential for below average temperatures and possibly even a significant cold spell has increased. Now, last video I talked about why I thought that wasn't so likely, but that has now changed somewhat, at least in my opinion, and today we'll go through how, why, how things might evolve, what to generally expect, the time frame, and the general situation on this possible cold spell. We'll start off by looking at the overall weather pattern, and we can use the GFS model for this. Now, this chart here is the 850 hectopascal temperature, which essentially means the temperature at the level of the atmosphere where the pressure equals 850 hectopascals, which is usually around 1.5 kilometers above the ground. So that's the temperature at this level. It gives us a good idea of the air mass and the boundaries, that kind of thing. And then the mean sea level pressure showing areas of above, also not above, just high and low pressure, and that's indicated by those isobars showing where the pressure is equal. Now, the model uncertainty does obviously decrease as we go further into the future, but as we start off by looking how this setup develops, the confidence in this period is fairly high, and that's going to be the lead up to the event. And generally from the 17th onwards is when we're looking at the possibility of the cold spell beginning. And if you play through this loop here, you can see initially we've got this high pressure centered just to the west of the UK and Ireland. That's for today, or this evening, and that's been responsible for all the dry but fairly gloomy and chilly weather across the UK over the last week and a half. And that's going to begin moving to the west, as you can see if I follow this through. And as it moves to the west, a couple things start to happen. So first of all, it allows a southerly airflow into the western Atlantic, which sets up in the future the potential for a Greenland high latitude blocking. And if you're a fan of the weather, and especially cold weather, you'll know that's generally a good sign for cold and snow potential, though I'll get into the details of that later. Now, the other thing to note is the fact that we've got this high pressure here means the temperature contrast between basically the cold and the warm side of the jet stream is fairly far north. And look out for this low pressure sitting on the temperature contrast, and of course when you have low pressure along the temperature contrast, it usually deepens, and you can see exactly that happens if you play through that loop. And by the time we're kind of Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, you can see it's already moving fairly quickly to the southeast and is now to the north of Scotland. And you've got a big cold front. Some people in America call this a trapdoor cold front. And behind that, you can see we've got very cold air. And initially, I thought, well, the GFS often has a bias for over-deepening these low pressures, so it's probably not going to be this strong. But if you look on the ensemble average, you can see the confidence is the same for deep low pressure. And if you look on the European, yes, it is a bit weaker, maybe as you'd expect, but still, generally the position and rough strength is the same, and the setup is the same with cold air flooding in from the northwest behind that cold front. And this will only move to the southeast during the next few days. So in terms of setting up this cold system, we have fairly good confidence now. We have a fairly, basically we have high certainty this is going to happen. And by the weekend, we're likely to have the low sitting somewhere over Scandinavia, and this will actually become cut off, so it's likely to stay stationary for a very long time, as you can see here. And that essentially ensures that across the northern half of the UK at least, and also further south, we're going to get that northerly airflow, bringing cold temperatures to many by Saturday and Sunday. And you can see that shown by the blue temperatures on the map. That's showing temperatures at the upper levels between 0 and -5, and also slightly lower than that. So already by Saturday, Sunday, we're going to have the northerly airflow. It's going to feel chillier, and we might even start to see snow showers coming in across the north, if you see that here. So the northern coast of Scotland and Northern Ireland by Sunday are potentially seeing a snow risk as a result of the instability between the cold air and the ocean surface. Now, the second thing I talked about was the southerlies, and as I said, that then goes on to develop a fairly strong Greenland high. You can see 1066 millibars there, and if you trace the isobars, and remember the wind flows clockwise around a high pressure and anti-clockwise around a low pressure in the northern hemisphere. So if you can trace from that, there's our low, and you basically are keeping on a fairly strong northerly flow across most of the UK. And also, you can see the colours, it's fairly deep. Because the winds are fairly strong, you're advecting that cold air from the Arctic, and so the air mass is pretty chilly. Now, this is by Monday, Tuesday, so uncertainty does start to decrease by this time. But if we take a look at the European weekly pressure anomalies, you can see that for the week 18th to the 25th of November, we both have quite dark blue colours over to kind of the east of us, and also we have quite strong pink colours, which indicates high certainty of this setup. And so, yes, it's way too early for specifics, but on the whole, the probability of getting this type of setup is increasing, which at least for the northern half of the UK and Ireland means the chance of cold and snow is pretty decent. Or snow, we can't really talk about this early on, but at least cold, and that leaves room for snow threats to develop. So personally, I've gone from being quite pessimistic to quite optimistic for at least some parts of the UK and Ireland, especially across the north, and that's because just the certainty has increased on this setup, and the way we get into this setup has also increased. And if we go back to what I talked about last video, which is the MJO, remember this has a generally 1 to 3 week lag on the weather in the UK, and phase 8, as we talked about, often leads to high latitude blocking, as you can see there in pink. And if you trace where phase 8 was, it was the beginning a few days of November, and add 2 weeks onto that and you're getting literally into the time frame that we're talking about. I mean, a little bit later on, but 18th of November. I'll come back to this in a bit because I do think this cold spell will be fairly short. But as I talked about earlier, we saw the initial low pressure develop because of that temperature contrast. Well, this low pressure here starts to develop along a temperature contrast, and the GFS at least is quite aggressive on during the early stages of next week, sending a low into the UK. Now, this is fairly uncertain. High pressure is quite easy to forecast. The strength and positioning of low pressure can be very difficult to forecast. I mean, just go back to my video on Storm Kirk, which basically what ended up happening was completely different to what any of the models said initially. But if we take a look at the ensemble tracks, you can see, oh sorry, I did not mean to show that, but you can see the general consensus is for a risk of slightly lower pressure developing there with the main low pressure in that general vicinity. And if you look on those storm tracks, you can see there are a few clusters coming down here, but this is fairly low confidence, and I also do think that the GFS often over deepens these low pressure systems and they're not likely to be as strong. And if you take a look at what the European model showed, this is probably more likely in my opinion, which is a generally weaker low pressure system. The highest end scenario, so if you really want snow, then take a look at the midnight run from the GFS today, which saw a deep low and snow developing widely on the northern half. Now, I'm not going to say this is impossible, but I just think it's probably unlikely. The more realistic scenario is the European model. It's generally better supported by the ensembles, and knowing the model biases seems more likely, but still a few days away, things could change, so I'll give an update on that happens. But either way, that sets up, as it clears to the east, it sets up a nice northerly flow across the UK by Monday. Now, in terms of snow risk, in the northern, you can automatically assume snow showers across the northern areas of the UK, but there are some signals this may be a particularly unstable northerly. And what we mean by unstable is there are a lot of kind of small troughs and disturbances and areas of rising motion, which number one can be hard to forecast, but number two, where you get rising motion, you get precipitation, and where it's cold, that precipitation is snow. And the general so what some of the models are showing, such as the European model and also the UK Met Office model, but I didn't get that ready, is a few small disturbances moving down from the north, which bring bands of snow to places. Now, please, please, please do not look at this and say, oh my god, look, snow in the Midlands on 6 AM on Wednesday. That's not going to happen. This is just an illustration of a possible scenario. And also, bear in mind, this is over a week out, so plenty of things could change. But like I said, with the confidence on the high pressure, I feel fairly optimistic, at least for the northern half. And actually, if we look at the ensembles, the last time I showed you this was on Sunday, and that was very, very spread out. But take a look how kind of close together these ensembles are. The confidence does seem to be really quite improving. There's a couple kind of milder suggestions, but I mean 3 and 4, and if you see the average is actually on the kind of milder side of the general cluster. And reminder, for snow we're generally looking at -5, and so in terms of, this is also for London by the way, so quite far south, you can see a fair few ensembles have that temperature, so potentially cold enough for snow from the 18th onwards. And then in terms of the longevity, we'll get into that in a bit. If we look for somewhere further north, let's take a look at Edinburgh. You can see the confidence on that is, I mean, I was going to say it's even better. it is, at least in terms of colder than 5 degrees. You can see basically all the models have that. So for pretty much all of the UK, the confidence is continuing to improve, and I would say these are quite optimistic signs. Sorry, these are quite positive signs. I'd be fairly optimistic. The one thing to look out for are these milder spikes, and that is again from the GFS giving the continued implication that we're going to see a few lows pushing in from the Atlantic. Sorry, and so you can see the GFS had a fairly significant storm here. Which, like I said, if it were to happen, you'd be seeing significant snowfall on the northern edge, blizzard conditions even, strong winds on the south. This would almost certainly be a named storm, but I just don't really think this is likely to happen, especially when you take a look at the jet stream forecast for the same time. Maybe this is not going to load, but you can see the jet stream is really not that strong in this particular case. I mean, yes, we've got those red colours, but for such a rapid deepening to as low as 953 millibars, that's properly deep. I just don't think this is really enough kick in the jet stream for that to happen. So I don't think this is likely. You may get excited by this. I just don't think it's likely. And yeah. However, the thing to look out for is the other models have been suggesting after that we may see another low. Now, by this point, this is really far out. This is a week and a half. So don't take any kind of too much stock in this. But there is potential, and this will be something that we watch as we move into the actual cold spell itself. But the potential is there for snow risks across more southern areas towards the second half of the week if we get any low pressure systems. Like I said, the probability of that happening is fairly low, maybe less than 20% at this time, but things can change. Well, for the general UK, we've got that cold air moving down from the north, snow showers likely across northern areas through the weekend into the week, and then, like I said, the potential for small disturbances in the flow, and these are harder to forecast, but anywhere it can be at risk of those. So I don't want to get too aggressive into these snow forecasts at this time because it's just uncertain and snow is really difficult to forecast. But at least in terms of cold weather, and the European model backs this up, all of the UK is now expected, and Ireland too, is now expected to see below average temperatures in blue during next week. So generally, things are looking up. We're looking at below average temperatures, possibly quite low into the negative figures, especially further north. Feeling cold, there's going to be a cold wind chill and snow risks across the general UK and Ireland, and then more focused risks we'll look at later on. Now, in terms of how long this is going to last, I don't think it's going to last too long, probably a week, maybe a tiny bit longer. The reason for that is the MJO is transitioning fairly quickly into phases of 1 to 2. And if you look on the composite diagram, that is driven by low pressure. So we're likely to see a battle towards the end of the cold spell. And in fact, the GFS already shows that here with lows coming from the southwest by the end of next week. Potentially there could be a snow risk, but it wouldn't be a proper one because it would just turn to rain and melt everything. But if we also look at the European ensembles, the averages, they seem to suggest a similar thing with low pressure returning. So this is generally matched up by the GFS as well. So probably by the end of that week, we're not going to see the snow risk returning to mild, but at least for the week of kind of 18th to 25th of November, probably ending before that. But we are looking at below average temperatures and the risk of snow in places. So that's about it for today. Thank you very much for watching, and I will continue to update as things change. And just a reminder, in the world of weather, anything can happen. So do not be surprised if in 5 days, maybe the cold spell is not looking as promising as it once was, which go back to my first video, or we could also be looking at potential snow forecasts. So stay up to date with the forecast. Thank you very much for watching and have a great day. Bye-bye.